Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:08 p.m. Central. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. Oh, I just remembered I needed to plug one thing. Check out a game on Steam by Hooded Horse called Xenonauts 2, Xenonauts. And what's good about that is there's an old computer game called Xenonauts, the first one. And it's like XCOM. I don't know if you remember that, Jeff, the XCOM. But it's basically like this government weird paramilitary unit that's hunting down aliens that have invaded Earth in a turn-based, like old-style computers. But cool. Xenonauts 2, it's on Steam by Hooded Horse. But yeah, I remember all those XCOMs. Those are always different. I love stuff that's different.
I miss turn-based gaming, too. That's pretty cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's Xenonauts, and they just had a new one come out after 1,000,000 years. And there's the old first one. It's a lot like the old XCOM. Those new XCOMs are good, but I suck at them. I get my ass handed to me. They're so hard. But it's weird though, because you have to you really work for the government and hunt down aliens. It's creepy kind of.
You kind of want to be on the other side. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're in like a paramilitary unit. But we got Wham here with us tonight representing. And Jeffrey Shanks, the return. I don't know. You've been on at least 3 or 4 times. Maybe?
3 or 4. Yeah, at least. Hosted one time with you, I think. Co-hosted with you once.
Yeah, that's right.
It's great to be back. Great to be back on.
Okay, I had to scream at them. My brother's coming home. So for some reason, this dog, every time someone comes through a door, even out of their room, it barks. And sometimes I want to strangle it. I don't, of course, but spray it with a water bottle. Shut up. I don't like doing that, but it's weird when my mom comes out of her room and the dog barks. But good to have you back. And so what's going on? Titan Comics has got the rights to Conan the Barbarian. I've been keeping up with Conan the Barbarian, the new series, and then there's the Blackstone, and then the Savage Sword of Conan. I think the 6th episode of that comes out, the 6th issue, and then that's going to end, I think. But what's going on?
Actually, when we were at Comic-Con just a few weeks ago, they actually announced that it's been renewed for another 6 issues. So it's going to 12 now, and if sales keep up, it'll probably keep going. It's pretty cool.
So Savage Sword of Conan, is that reprints of older stuff, or is it newer stuff too?
No, it's all new. So, for your viewers and listeners that may not remember, Savage Sword of Conan was an old school black and white comic back in the 70s and 80s. There was the regular monthly Conan the Barbarian comic that Marvel was putting out, written by Roy Thomas, great art by John Buscema and others. Savage Sword of Conan was, because it was a large magazine size, comic magazine, basically, and in black and white, they could get away with not calling it a comic book. And that allowed them to not have to be censored by the Comics Code Authority, right? Which, most of the major comics back in the old days had to go before a censorship board, Marvel and DC and all of that. So since it didn't have to be censored, they could have more adult themes. You could have more violence and sex and nudity and blood and gore and, heads flying everywhere. So it felt more like what a real Conan the Barbarian story ought to be. And it's kind of legendary in comic circles, Savage Sword of Conan. The initial run, kind of petered out in the early 90s. But now Titan Comics, working with Heroic Signatures, who are the rights owners, have not only relaunched a new Conan the Barbarian color monthly comic, they've brought back the old black and white Savage Sword of Conan that everybody used to love back in the day. It's all new art, all new stories. And in fact, I just made my comic book writing debut in issue number 4.
Nice.
Came just a few weeks back.
That's really cool. What's yours called? The title of your story, and tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So one of the cool things about Savage Sword of Conan, even back in the old days, was you'd have one main story that was about Conan. but then they would often have a backup story by some of the other characters that were created by Robert E. Howard, the 1920s, 30s pulp writer who invented Conan. So sometimes they would have backup stories by his other characters, like Solomon Kane, who's a sort of Puritan, witch hunter type adventurer, Kull of Atlantis, who was sort of a barbarian king in this sort of primordial, pre-cataclysmic age, antediluvian age. So the modern Savage Sword is trying to do the same thing, introduce some of Robert E. Howard's other characters beyond Conan. So my story was a short story that featured a couple of Howard's lesser-known characters, Professor Conrad and Professor Kirwan. And they're basically two sort of occult detectives, occult archaeologists that encounter Lovecraftian supernatural horrors. They were kind of Howard's attempt, Robert E. Howard's attempt to do stories in the same style as his friend and correspondent H.P. Lovecraft. For those of you that might, your audience may be familiar with Lovecraft.
Yes.
So that was a story that I did. Those were the characters that I really wanted to try my hand at.
Conan in that with like modern
so
people?
Conan's not in it. It takes place in the modern day, in the 1930s, but it takes place in Egypt in the 1930s, where these occult, archaeologists basically encounter a pre-Egyptian ruins from ancient Stygia from the Conan stories. So it does kind of tie in, right? But it takes place in the early 20th century, right, in the 1930s.
I know in some of the Marvel stuff, Conan was time traveling, and some of the last stuff I couldn't keep up with all the Marvel stuff, but there are reasons.
Yeah, that's so it was kind of fun though. So it's again, I really didn't introduce myself. So my day job, I'm an archaeologist. I'm a professional archaeologist, but I do a lot of work in popular culture, especially looking at how archaeology appears in popular culture. But I also do a lot of academic work on early pulp fiction, especially the lowbrow horror fantasy stuff that we all love. That's where I'm at. So sometimes I get to mix my my two loves, archaeology and pop culture, occasionally.
And this is your first comic. How's it different?
So
how's it different?
My first actual comic story. I've been writing essays in the back of the regular Conan comic. Now ever since Titan started their new run. Basically doing a not really academic so much, but sort of writing more about Robert E. Howard, about the characters, about the original stories that the comics are based on. Always trying to point the fans that might just read the comics or be familiar with Conan from the movies or the video games, point them back to the original Robert E. Howard stories from the 1930s, because they're pretty darn cool.
Definitely, and we know they were friends, right? Lovecraft and Howard.
They were. Yeah, they started. They were both being published in a pulp magazine called Weird Tales, and for those of your audience may not be familiar with pulp magazines, these were in the early 20th century. These were kind of cheap, disposable fiction magazines. Not highbrow literature by any stretch of the imagination, right? But very few of authors survived from that pulp era. There's a handful: Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, Ray Bradbury. Got started there. Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and the mystery pulps. So a handful of writers. There were some good writers in there, but for the most part, it was schlocky, kind of cheap fiction. But there were some, interesting characters in there, like the Shadow and Doc Savage, that are kind of prototypes of the superhero. And, they would have a big influence on the superhero genre and comic books that would come out a few years later in the late 30s and 1940s. So that was where Howard and Lovecraft, they were, kind of cutting edge, as part of that medium in those pulp magazines. They were two of the guys that were actually pretty decent writers. So they kind of naturally gravitated towards each other and started writing letters to each other. And their correspondence lasted, for, almost, 5 or 6 years, until sadly Howard took his own life in 1936. His inner demons got the better of him, unfortunately. And Lovecraft died the next year, 1937. You
What
know,
was some of their
answer.
correspondence about? Do you remember what they talked about or
Oh
anything?
God, yes. I've read it. It is absolutely fascinating. They talked about everything you can imagine. They both really enjoyed history, archaeology, anthropology, subjects that I enjoy. So of course the anthropology and stuff that they were reading was pretty dated, even by their time. It was, a lot of it's kind of been discredited, pseudoscience-y kind of stuff. Um, they talked about world politics, and they talked about each other's local geographic regions. Howard telling Lovecraft about his native Texas, and Lovecraft talking about New England. He was from Providence, Rhode Island. Absolutely fascinating correspondence. They talked about literature, their favorite writers, and philosophy. I mean, these guys wrote just voluminous letters to each other, back and forth. You
Did
can
it get
get their
weird?
correspondence. There's a 2-volume set called A Means to Freedom that you can find out there that has their entire surviving correspondence. And it's a pretty fascinating read. Some of it's a little dated and cringy. It's written by guys in the 1930s. But it's interesting to get inside those creative minds, right, and see those hamsters spinning, because a lot of the stuff that's in their letters, you'll see it all of a sudden it'll end up in the next story they write. And they influenced each other. So it's pretty cool, pretty fascinating stuff.
I wish listed it on Amazon. That's pretty interesting for sure.
It's pretty cool. I mean, this is kind of the birth of some of the genres we love: fantasy, horror, science fiction. These guys, Howard, Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, some of the other writers in Weird Tales, and some of the other early pulps like Amazing Stories and stuff like that. That's where a lot of these genres that most of us enjoy today, they really kind of had their formative years in those sleazy pulp magazines in the 1920s and 30s.
Robert Howard kind of looks like a mobster in his picture, like the Penguin. I saw that new Penguin last night. See it? It is Colin Farrell.
Oh, is it good?
It's great. It's great.
Cool.
You can't
it
tell
looks good. I haven't watched it yet. I knew it just dropped. I'll have to check that out.
It's getting great reviews, but he's the Penguin. But I mean, it doesn't even look like him or sound like him. But he should win an award or something for it for sure. It's worth checking out. But yeah, I see the picture of Robert. He kind of looks like Al Capone.
Yeah, he's got the fedora there.
Yeah. But Weird Tales, Blackstone Publishing put out that anthology. They sent that to me. And then they also have like some books coming out under a Weird Tales banner. One's called Nether Station, like I think Kevin Anderson or something, but they're putting out like fiction under the banner, like regular fiction.
Yeah. So that's the modern iteration of Weird Tales. It's come in and out of publication over the years. There've been several iterations of the magazine. But yeah, it's been around for over 100 years now. It debuted in 1923, that magazine. Howard's first professional story was in 1925. So next year will be the 100th anniversary of his professional career. It was a caveman story called Spear and Fang, which I don't know if anybody watches the Tartakovsky animated series Primal, about a caveman.
I need to catch up on
the first episode of that is called Spear and Fang. So that's kind of an homage to Howard.
Yeah, that was really good. That was pretty good, actually. That was well animated. And I'm trying to think with there's some Norse kind of book I have of Robert's that's like, I can't remember the name of it, like a Norse fiction.
Swords of the North?
Swords of the North, did you say? There's another. I have to look it up. That's not it. But
Marchers of Valhalla?
Yeah, that's it. Marchers of Valhalla. Yeah. I have that in paperback. Yeah. I need to actually read it. It looks like it would be badass, and I need to read it for sure.
It's pretty cool. That's so the main character in that story is a guy named James Allison, who again it's a modern story, modern 1930s, right, when Howard wrote it. And James Allison, he lives in Texas, and he's disabled, but so his body is kind of trapped here physically, right? But he's able to experience his past lives. And so it's sort of just a framework story. He'll start remembering a past life, And Marches of Valhalla is one of these James Allison stories. He remembers a time when he was an Aesir warrior, basically at the end of the Hyborian Age, as part of like, this march of, Aesir across, at the, the end of the Hyborian Age and marching across the continent. And they go across the Bering Strait into North America. But it's back, obviously in, prehistoric 10,000 years ago or whatever. And they find a lost civilization. They actually march all the way down to Texas. So it's a fun kind of story. It's like the Hyborian Age comes to Texas. Howard was obviously having a little bit of fun with that one.
Swords of the Norse kind of expensive on eBay. I'm looking at Amazon now. It's like $50 on eBay. Is that normal? Yeah.
It's kind of a limited edition. That's got all of the James Allison stories, the Cormac McCart stories, a lot of Howard's sort of kind of.
Did that just come out? That says 2024. So that says it just came out.
There was a limited edition that was put out by the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press, probably about 10 years ago or so. And they've just now re-released it in a mass market version of it. Market, but it's still a small print run. But it's
I might have to try to hit them up for a promotional copy. That's what I'll buy it. There you go. Luckily, there's a lot of them, so I'll buy it 1 year.
It should be coming out on ebook soon, so the ebook version should be cheaper.
There's a paperback that's a little cheaper, but the hardcover is more tempting, of course.
Right.
But that's one I'll have to definitely get at some point. That seems badass. But let's see. I hear a weird little echo thing. Hopefully it's not. Who knows? It's gone now. Wait, now I hear it again. Do you hear it? Let me check my settings.
I hear something. I hear something.
Yeah, there's some kind of. Let's see. There we go. You still hear me okay? Everything's good and clear?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, sometimes you got to mess around with the little settings on the bottom and make sure you got your mic on, because it'll go to weird stuff like your cam, or which I didn't even know there's a mic in my cam, but sometimes it even does a default that gets kind of weird and you have to change it to another one that's the same one. It's a pain in the ass, but so what's going on with Titan? Is there any more Conan? What happened?
Well, I mean, just to give a little backstory, I guess. So, Marvel, Dark Horse had the Conan license, comic license for many years in the early 2000s up through the teens or so, and that lapsed, and then Marvel picked it back up again, and Marvel had it for a few years, and I think. COVID hit, and I think some of that sort of slowed down some of the issues, and I think it just kind of lost steam. And to be frank, I wasn't fully following the Marvel run that religiously, like the Dark Horse run, which I really enjoyed. There was some good stuff with the Marvel run, but some of it was hit or miss probably. But finally, the rights owners, which is a company called Heroic Signatures, they got the rights back from Marvel and partnered with Titan Comics. And Titan they're a British company. They're really better known for their books. They do a lot of both fiction, but also nonfiction books on popular culture. And they do have comics, but they're a little bit new to the comics game. Compared to some of the other companies that have been out there, and it's usually licensed properties. So Heroic Signatures and Titan kind of did a partnership where Titan is the publisher and the distributor, but Heroic Signatures really still maintains creative control over the content for the most part. And so the writers and the artists and all of that actually work for Heroic Signatures. I do, consulting, and I write the essays and stuff. I'm an independent contractor with Heroic Signatures, the rights owners, and then Titan publishes it. So, what's kind of cool about that is that creative control stays really close to the rights owners, who've always been very protective, of the property and of the franchise, and are also very good about promoting Robert E. Howard and the creator of Conan. So I think in many ways it's led to a better product. It's really like everybody that works on this book, it's a true labor of love. and I think it shows. It's a really independent comic publisher, and yet the first issue of Conan, when it relaunched, it went to 5 or 6 printings, which is kind of unheard of in this modern era of comics publishing. And it all cracked the top 10, for all comics, competing with the top Marvel and DC titles, so, not just Marvel and DC alone, but it was only getting beat out by like Batman and Wolverine and X-Men and stuff like that, so it was a huge surprise hit. And because the fact that it went to all these printings, that kind of shows that the word of mouth on it was great. The word started getting around. What's interesting is even, you always get a big bump in comics publishing on the first issue. What's interesting is that issues 2, 3, 4, 5 all went to multiple printings. That never happens. So, that's word of mouth, that causes that kind of thing. They got to keep going back and printing more copies of later issues. That means you've got a surprise hit on your hands. And so it's been quite a run. We're over a year in now with the new monthly series. The writer is Jim Zub, who is, certainly one of the top, comics writers in the industry today. He was doing some of the Conan writing for Marvel when they had the license a few years back. He's also really well known for the writer of the Dungeons and Dragons comics. Jim's a big gamer. Also just the nicest guy you've ever met. He's really amazing and generous with his time and generous with the fans. He's always out there interacting with fans. Really great guy, really smart, big Robert E. Howard and Conan fan. He gets the character. He and I will do calls, just to bounce ideas off and stuff. But mostly we just end up geeking out the whole time because we're just so excited to be able to, be doing this, and just having so much fun. It's great when you get paid to do your hobby, right?
Definitely. Have they mentioned any other things that they're going to do with Conan? I mean, that's the big problem with a lot of comics nowadays, especially Marvel and even DC, is oversaturation. Like you say, I want to read a Spider-Man comic. You're like, there's like 40 of them, and you're just like, screw this. That's exhausting. I'm not.
Yeah.
so many. They seem to be going slow and at a good rate and not going crazy with it yet. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, you could see how maybe there's a little bit of a danger that it kind of looked like it. I could see some people are getting what they're calling Black Stone fatigue, right? The Black Stone storyline has been kind of an ongoing one. And, so we mentioned Savage Sword earlier. The two main titles, you've got the regular monthly comic, Conan the Barbarian, and then there's Savage Sword of Conan, which is the black and white magazine. And that's, what the monthly title is kind of usually like ongoing arcs, it'll be like 4-issue arcs. Savage Sword is all just one-off stories, more anthology style. But we are doing a 4-issue mini-series right now. It's kind of a special event, Battle of the Black Stone. And while Conan is the kind of the main protagonist, you have some of Howard's other characters like Solomon Kane, and others, and Conrad and Kirwan that I talked about, crossing over from all different times, coming together for kind of a crossover event kind of thing for this miniseries. So I think we're pushing the edge of that oversaturation thing, but the Battle of the Black Stone thing is not really a third title. It's just a one-off miniseries, just kind of a special thing. And they may do that in the future as well. Do these sort of 4-issue miniseries. I think there's a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 more in the works in the future. I can't say too much. I'm limited as to what I can say. I know a lot more than I can say, but there's definitely going to be some cool, new stuff coming out. What I'm hopeful, we're going to have some of Howard's other characters may get their own series, in the future. I'm not sure. I don't think I can name names just yet, but I would look for that. That's one of the cool things about this kind of crossover event is it's exposing people that might just know Conan, or maybe they know Call, or maybe they know Solomon Kane because they have a comics history. it's exposing some of these comics readers to some of Howard's lesser known characters. One of the other really interesting characters is Dark Agnes. She's she was really sort of a cutting edge character, Howard writing in the 30s, a really, a very strong female protagonist who's a sword woman, a mercenary in 16th century France, fighting in all the the different wars, like the Italian wars and things like that. And she gives up her life. Basically, she was supposed to be forced to marry this nobleman, and she didn't want to do it. And she ends up stabbing him during their wedding ceremony and running off to become a mercenary. And it's an absolutely fascinating character, a very angry character, full of kind of rage and frustration, and just at sort of being, kind of rebelling against the constraints that society tries to put onto her, gender norms and things like that in 16th century France. And she completely rebels against that to do her own thing. It makes you wonder how much of Howard is potentially in there, that idea of wanting to break out of your, maybe the small, rural town in Texas where he was at with this great creative mind, I wonder, how much of him is in characters like that. So Dark Agnes is a very intriguing character. She features in this miniseries. Another one that's always one of my favorites is El Barak. That's Francis Xavier Gordon, and he's a Texas gunslinger. It goes, early, turn of the century and early 1900s. He goes over to, he leaves the U.S. and goes over and starts traveling the world in the Middle East and South Asia and Afghanistan, having adventures, kind of Indiana Jones style in the early 20th century. He is very much a Indiana Jones prototype in a lot of ways, and he's featured in this as well. So I'm excited. Some of the comics readers are going to get to see some of these other Robert E. Howard characters that maybe aren't as well known, but are super cool. And we'll see if they take off. Maybe they'll get their own series. That'd be great.
I wonder if that will do a Norse situation comic. That'd be cool, but I don't know if there's anything that popular of his. Is there anything like that could be a possibility, you think?
Like what? Say that one more time.
The Norse stuff.
The Norse stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, potentially. One character that we haven't seen yet, not so much Norse, although there's Norsemen that play into it, is Bran McMorn. Is one of Howard's really cool characters. He's the last king of the Picts in Scotland in the waning days of the Roman Empire, being pushed back by the Romans and kind of fighting for his existence. It's almost in some ways, almost a anti-colonialist kind of story, right? The pushing back against the Romans, trying to colonize and take their land, and he knows that there's no way he's ever going to win, but he keeps fighting for his people. Kind of this doomed king, kind of character. So we may see some Bran McMorn. There are some Norsemen that appear in some of the Bran McMorn stories. So we'll see. You get a little bit of a Hyborian Age Norse thing in the current arc that we just did in the regular monthly comic. Is Frost Giant's Daughter, which definitely has sort of a proto-Viking kind of vibe to it, although it's a Conan story. It takes place in the Hyborian Age. So check that out. You'll probably dig that.
What's the one that had I saw a cover that had like a dog man, like a werewolf or something? Was that, you remember that story?
Oh, that was a Savage. Yeah, that was one of the Savage Sword issues. Yeah, there's a werewolf story in there. Conan versus werewolves, although with an interesting twist. That's kind of a unique, it's sort of a unique story. I don't want to give away the premise too much. People should go check it out. But yeah, it's a Conan the Barbarian werewolf story. But yeah, the writer had a unique idea with what he wanted to do with that, and it's kind of cool. It was a little controversial. Some people didn't like it, and other people thought it was great. So I don't know. You got to check it out and see what you think.
Definitely. There's a lot of neat stuff going on with the Titan with this, of course. Then there's like an EC Comics kind of little resurrection. I've been keeping up with those new ones.
I saw that. I haven't haven't really I don't follow a whole lot of other titles. It's all I can do to keep up with the Conan stuff, especially because I'm I'm writing the essays in there every month. But I did see something about that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
It's
it's two titles: Epitaphs from the Abyss and Cruel Universe, and it's kind of like the anthology kind of stuff that like Tales from the Crypt. Of course,
cool.
I don't know if they're going to bring back Tales from the Crypt, but that would be pretty cool. There's also Elijah Wood's doing this series. There hasn't been much about it, but it's like a company, I think, a banner of new comics, High Strangeness, and and it's got, I'll have to find the picture and show you, but there's like this alien and all these masks on the wall of different cryptids and stuff, like Mothman, and it looks pretty crazy. I'll have to find the picture and
like
see if I
a
can.
comic book John Keel kind of vibe. I'm digging it.
Yeah, and it looks really good. I'll see if I can find it. But
Nice.
Is that pretty much the only one you keep up with? Is the Conan stuff
Yeah,
now?
pretty much. I've been keeping up with some of the Frazetta comics, right? Like Fire and Ice. Those are pretty cool. Bill Willingham's writing those from Fables. Those have been pretty good as well. But I dip my toe in and out, a little bit. But yeah, it's kind of fun. I've been, one thing you asked about some of the new stuff coming out. One of the things I'd like to do, I've been working on a book on Robert E. Howard and Conan for many years, talking about his world building, but also like how Howard used archaeology and what we would call pseudo archaeology, right, or alternative history, in his fiction. He was incorporating things like Atlantis and Lemuria, lost continents, that kind of stuff, into his stories. And, he was drawing on a lot of the same sources that would ultimately be the source of, guys like Graham Hancock and, people like that are, hypothesizing that there were these lost civilizations at the end of the Ice Age that we've forgotten about. What's fun is, the Hyborian age of Conan, that's kind of what it is, right? This sort of lost civilization at the end of the Ice Age. There's a lot of parallels out there. It's kind of fun. So I'm working on, because of my background, I do a lot of work on, sort of the history of what we would now call pseudo-archaeological, ideas, and how it influenced early science fiction and fantasy and vice versa, and how they influenced occult, teachings and esoteric traditions as well. How all of those areas kind of influenced each other. So that's a book I've been working on. So we'll see. That'll be mixing Conan with sort of alternative ideas of archaeology. That should be kind of fun.
And I have dogs going insane for some reason. What's new? But but that sounds really good. Yeah, there's just so many titles you get sick of keeping up with them, but some of them I try to keep up with. Like there's a Creep Show series from Image, based on those old movies. Meteor Ship, Stephen King and all that. They did some comics that are just tell little short stories by different authors and stuff like that. But there's some good ones, but mostly it's just too much. Too much indeed. Have you been doing anything with books or anything lately? What was your last release? I remember some zombie kind of book, but
I did a collection of zombies. The one I was just talking about, doing this, sort of pseudo archaeology and pulp fiction book. That's going to probably be one of my next ones. But I've also been working on a book on Robert E. Howard's world building, like how he created the world of Conan, right, using anthropology and archaeology and other things like that. Oh yeah, there it is. Cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, that's Elijah Wood's new comic series or something. I don't know if that's just the banner of the company or an actual title, but trying to figure out what that alien is. We've joked that it looks like a butthole, sort of, but I don't know what's going on with his head, but but it looks cool regardless. There's like a man in black, a mantis, the green man, Hopsville goblins, like a communion alien. I don't know if that's Hillary down in the corner or something. Kind of Japanese devil, and then Anubis. That looks pretty cool. So Bigfoot, apparently some kind of entity that wears, I guess he's Those are his masks. There's Baphomet. So I'm keeping an eye on it, but there hasn't been anything else but that. That's the only thing they've said about it is that picture and like an article,
Cool.
but nothing else.
Have to keep an eye out for it. You know me, I love this stuff. I love, I enjoy like John Keel and those guys and all of his books. I think he's the one that coined the term Eye Stranges, of Mothman prophecies, fame. So yeah, I'm there's a couple of book projects that I'm working on. Those are kind of the areas that, I'm, kind of focused on looking at, sort of these ideas of non-traditional archaeology and history, like the stuff that, Graham Hancock and others promote, and where those ideas come from. A lot of them have their origins in the late 1800s, from writers like Ignatius Donnelly, who wrote kind of the first real popular book on Atlantis. There were ones before that, but the one that really popularized the idea, that Atlantis might be real. Madame Blavatsky, of course, one of the founders of Theosophy, did a lot to promote those kinds of ideas as well, in sort of esoteric traditions. But also a lot of early science fiction writers, that put their stamp on those ideas, and they ended up influencing the pulp writers of the 1920s and 30s, like Lovecraft and Howard. Lovecraft's book, The Necronomicon, was based on the Book of Dijon, which was this supposed book of ancient wisdom that Madame Blavatsky was promoting, right? So
yeah,
and then pulp writers like Howard, they went on to influence esoteric thought and ancient aliens ideas in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So it all kinds of feeds on each other. Did you know like the shape-shifting reptilian aliens?
Yeah.
You can directly trace that idea back to Robert E. Howard Cole's story. I don't know if you knew that or not.
What story is it?
The Shadow Kingdom, the first Cole story, where he has the shape-shifting serpent men in it that kind of take the place of politicians and people in the court, but they turn out to be shapeshifters. There was a kind of a sort of a mystic leader of several kind of esoteric organizations in the 40s. A guy named Maurice Doriel is the name that he went by. His real name was Claude Dodgkins or something like that. But he was a big, apparently big early science fiction fan. But he had this, not really a cult, more like kind of a proto New Age following out in L.A. And he wrote a number of books, including like the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean and stuff like that. But he just stole a bunch of stuff straight from Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft and Robert Bloch and some of the other writers for Weird Tales. He was clearly a Weird Tales fan, and put it into his some of his writings. And one of the things that he borrowed was the Robert E. Howard Serpent Men. And that kind of found its way into kind of New Age thought and stuff like that in the 50s and 60s. And
what was the Robert Howard book?
David Icke,
What was the Robert Howard book? What was the book called? Cole, Kull?
The Cole story was the Shadow Kingdom. It's the first Call of Atlantis.
Okay.
And it's a short story. It's one of Robert E. Howard's short stories. Came out in 1929. But yeah, that is almost certainly the origin of the idea of the reptilian aliens. Although if you think they're, if you buy them that they're real, well, maybe Robert E. Howard was just tapping into something. Who knows, right?
Yeah. There's something to it, but I don't try to get too kooky with it. But some people do for sure.
Right?
There's definitely something to it. I know I've read a lot of shamanism stuff where they're tripping and stuff, and they see serpentine entities. And I had a similar experience, and there was definitely something there. I don't know what the hell it was, but something for sure with it.
Well, I mean, it is something that you see in a lot of iconography, right? Going in a lot of cultures, ancient cultures. Certainly, I think, whatever it is, that idea of snakes and reptiles, it kind of triggers something in us as humans, something primal. And there's some kind of, basic level fear there that's in our subconscious, because you see that symbology everywhere, right? In ancient cultures. So who knows?
I
Right?
always see the thing about imagine dinosaurs on another planet that didn't die and what would they, evolve into. That's pretty interesting to think about
Right?
for sure.
Yeah, it's fun.
There's some guy, I forget his
fun
name.
stuff.
He has a site called Reptoids or something where he's got little models of evolution of these beings that supposedly survived from dinosaurs and evolved into humanoids. And he's been on
That's
coast
fun.
and coast and stuff, but I can't
Right.
remember his name. But
Yeah, that's fun.
Reptoids.
Yeah,
But
it's fun stuff,
the biggest thing with comics that there's a few I keep up with, mostly at the stop because it's just so expensive. And the variant titles, it's like I just try to get the cover A, people
Right.
try to get cover B, C, D, and all it is just art's cool, but it's the same thing. It's just got different art. And then
the new Conan title, they often have 3 or 4 variant covers, and usually I'm like you, I don't get sucked into the variant cover thing. But I'll admit, with this one, since I've got it, I've got the essays in the back, I've been kind of like, oh, I got to have every cover. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for the variants. I never do that normally, but I feel like this one, I'm in there. I gotta buy them all.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, there's some that I've done it with, but it gets rough. Then next thing you know, you have 20 boxes of comics and running out of.
That's already happened. Yeah, like now I've got too many. So I'm like, why did I do this? Like it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
Now I'm overloaded.
The last one I did that with, there's a G.I. Joe #1 coming out, and I've told you about this, but Robert Kirkman, the Walking Dead guy, is doing a whole G.I. Joe Transformers. And he's doing a comic called Void Rivals. It's kind of like a Star Wars, Star Trek situation, and they're all meshed in this same universe. And there's actually Joshua Williamson's doing G.I. Joe #1 in November, and it's good. Like it's really good. It's a lot darker.
Yeah, I haven't been reading. What do you think? You like it, huh?
I love it. Yeah, best place there so far. There's been Cobra Commander series. It's only 5 issues. Those are amazing. It's kind of the whole story of Cobra Commander. And that's where he gets weird in the new ones. He basically is a human that lives underground with serpentine people in a place called Cobra La. That's like Shangri-La. And there's these serpentine beings that are tall reptilians. And
play with that same idea, right? The subterranean reptilians. That's kind of fun.
He does something that causes trouble and pisses him off, and someone blows up his face and he has to wear the helmet. But then he tells them, I'll go above and do stuff for you, and gets out of it. So basically they're looking for some energy source called Energon or something. And he goes above, and then it ties in Kirkman's space stuff with the serpentine people that are on the Cobra Commander side. Then you have the G.I. Joe stuff, which they did Duke. Then there's Scarlet and Destro. Like these are 4 different series with only 5 issues apiece. And then there's Transformers. That's a limited series that ties into it. And then there's the new G.I. Joe that starts. But it's pretty interesting. I mean, that Walking Dead guy, even though they milk that to death and you get sick of it, everything he does pretty much gets props. Does pretty well. So it's doing well for sure. But it's darker
that's
and
cool.
weirder.
That's fun. That's fun. And there they are playing with the whole reptilian motif, right? That's been around for a while. So that's kind of fun.
And in it, the Transformers get military people, the evil Transformers, and just splat them like flies, and they kill them. Like they show the blood go everywhere, but it's more violent. So it's good. But I love Spawn too. I love all that stuff. But that's even getting to where there's so many. You're like, ugh. I like it, but my God, you keep up with this shit. I got other things to do. But so you used to collect, and then you just kind of quit doing it because it became a pain in the butt.
After got in high school and got a little older. I did collect for a while, but it kind of phased out. But then I got back. I started collecting when I was older. In the early 2000s, I got in, started collecting again, mostly focused on Golden Age. in comics and picking up, I still didn't really get much into the new comics. I was reading Conan and stuff like that I enjoyed, but I got into Golden Age comics, and I really started enjoying the history of the comics medium and the history of comics fandom. And, that's me. I'm an archaeologist, right? So I get into that kind of stuff. But that led to pulp magazines, like I was talking about earlier, right? Because they kind of predate comics. They're sort of, influential, on the early comics. And, of course, I was already a Robert E. Howard and Conan fan, a Lovecraft fan. So that was kind of a natural fit. So I started collecting pulp magazines, which some of them are incredibly rare. They're very fragile. They weren't made to survive. They were made to just be read and tossed, so it's been kind of fun collecting pulps as well as Golden Age comics over the years. And that's probably where I've been focusing, mostly. That you mentioned the zombie book I did. That was a collection of zombie stories from the pulp magazines, from the 20s and 30s, early zombie stories. And that's fun. I'd like to do some more collections of pulp stories like that. Maybe, vampires from the pulps or werewolves from the pulps. So I don't know. What would you like to see?
I don't know. I like the vampire idea, but werewolves definitely seems to be getting a good buzz lately,
It'd be
and
fun.
we've done shows on paranormal dogman situations, and there are people that are like freaking out saying they're seeing weird stuff like that, really. So
yeah, the dogman thing is pretty weird. I got to say, that's a weird thing. Yeah. People are, it's not your typical Bigfoot. That's for sure. People are seeing, I've seen a lot of that. A lot of people are saying they're seeing the dogman thing. That's weird. Who knows,
We've had Small Town Monsters on. I don't know if you've heard of them, but look them up. Small Town Monsters. They have a site. They put out documentaries and books about towns that have had weird alien cryptid experiences, and like people go crazy and lynch mobs and cops get involved. And there's some crazy ones like Chestnut Ridge where the military came out and took something away, and you go there now and there's a plaque about it and parades and shit. So they do documentaries about it, but they've been doing some dogman stuff that's pretty interesting. We've had Aaron Deese on. There's like a dogman triangle sighting encounter. Like on the map, it's a triangle of encounters that have happened in Texas, and there's some documentaries and books on it and people. One guy on the documentary like peed himself, and he's anonymous. I guess he doesn't want people to know who he is.
Wow.
But there's some good stuff. I believe there's something to it. I've never seen one, but we did see.
You mentioned talking about the high strangeness thing earlier, in John Keel, and his sort of idea, and you kind of following, Jacques Vallée, around the same time, in the late 60s, started putting out this idea that a lot of what we call paranormal phenomena, things like, cryptid sightings and UFOs and ghosts and all of these things, may be sort of different manifestations of humans encountering some kind of either extra dimensional or higher dimensional sort of entities or phenomena, and they're translating it into their minds in ways that they can understand it, that are cultural tropes, right? Carl Jung had even kind of toyed with this idea a little bit earlier. He wrote a book on flying saucers in the late 50s. A lot of people don't know about, where he was kind of toying with these ideas. And Vallée in particular was one of the first to point out things like the similarities in modern descriptions of encounters with aliens and alien abductions and things like that, with the medieval stories of fairies and elves and things like that, right? You had or like the nighttime visitations, right? Like night hags and succubus, the succubus and the incubus and things like that. Or the fairies coming at night, like the fairy bride, right? And replacing babies with changelings, that kind of stuff, right? So, he was sort of pointing out the basic elements of some of these strange encounters that people have. You can see similar examples in mythology and folklore going back hundreds and even thousands of years. And, his hypothesis was that, whatever we're encountering, this larger phenomena, people are because our minds can't really completely wrap around it, we're turning it into something in our minds, or whatever this phenomenon is intentionally projecting itself in different ways, in ways that we can understand culturally, right? So it may be fairies in the Middle Ages, or angels 2,000 years ago. Today, in the 1950s and 60s, it becomes aliens, when science fiction was becoming popular, right? So that's an interesting idea. It's an interesting hypothesis. Both Keel and Vallée were sort of proponents of it. And I don't know, it's intriguing. I don't know what the answer to any of this is, but I don't know. It's an interesting, kind of way of approaching a lot of these types of paranormal phenomena that that we all have heard different heard stories about, or encountered, or experienced ourselves. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. What are your thoughts? Have you read John Keel or Vallée or any of them and kind of explored that?
We both have, and Wham knows a lot about him more than I do. I know a little bit. My extent is
Right.
some of the books. I've had to transcript some of his older books and some of his articles into books for Andrew Colvin, a friend of mine, and had to retype a lot of his words. So that was kind of weird kind of thing to do.
Right.
Like old stuff from articles got put in books and things, and I had to go and type it, over his words. And poor Andy had to edit it, which God bless him with my editing, but it was decent enough to turn it into a book. So there was just old stuff like
Right.
articles and things like that. But yeah, I mean,
I just wonder, because I know you've had a lot of experiences. We've talked about him when I've been on the show before, and I just wondered your perspective on some of those ideas.
He's definitely
someone who is an experiencer.
He's definitely the king that gets overlooked sometimes by people, and then of course I know Steve Ward's coming on not next Friday, but the next Friday, October 4th. So we'll be talking about him a lot, and the Mothman Festival. And then next Friday is Dennis Stone on America's Stonehenge. But as far as my experiences, I mean, I think what Kill says with a lot of stuff, this stuff being here amongst us, kind of like it's always been here and it lives amongst us sort of view. And I think quantum physics ties into it a lot, like multidimensional realms and things like that. But I think a lot of it is this stuff's here with us, and it's always been here, and it's probably some of it may have been here longer than we have. Especially some of the Bigfoot stuff gets pretty weird, where Kawani Laparitis and stuff says that there's a race of Bigfoot-like creatures, like there's different kinds, but there's a particular kind called the ancient ones, and they've like been around and helped with different civilizations, and you can find weird art with these people in it, like hairy people. That's weird as hell. Like I've even seen weird Bible art with hairy people in it, but and they're kind of like this race of hairy people that are probably smarter than us and been around. Maybe they were made first, or maybe they're, who knows? I don't know. There's so much to it. But with my experiences, most of mine seems to have been brought on from traumatic events and suffering, drawing it to you, like testicular cancer and all that stuff, and then my dad's death. So somehow that tied into it. And I've jokingly, I lost a testicle. I've said Odin's meatball, which I don't want to compare myself to Odin, but the thing where you lose something so bad and gain
insight from it, right?
There's something to that. I'll testify to that for sure. Right? But not that I don't know. I don't want to get into a debate about if an eye or a testicle is more important. I would think an eye, but it's still pretty shitty when you lose one.
Yeah, it sucks either way, right?
yeah. But there's something to that PTSD and trauma that brings this stuff up, that opens the senses. And I know a lot of shamans and stuff get into that, but there's that's what I definitely think, there's something to it. But as far as what it is, I still don't know. I think there's just so many different things. I think there's something that made us that was alien, that may, call it whatever you want, the Lord, Bob, or whatever, but something put us here like tadpoles and left us. And there we are. And now it may have left and then went on and left forever, like Preacher.
Right.
But seeing it is the weirdest thing when you see it. And now I would like to see it more and don't as much as I would like. But some of it, You know, I've had UFOs over houses in different locations where it seemed like the UFO was there for me or for some reason for the neighborhood. And
Right.
that's a hard one to deal with. But I don't know. I don't know is my mantra with a lot of it. I still don't know. That's what
Right.
pisses me off about it so much. It's like dealing with the Riddler. Like, here, look at me really quick. Nana nana boo boo. It moons you, and you see it, and then it doesn't say anything else to you. You know, it doesn't sit down and talk with you. It's just like some Riddler kind of crap. You know, here I
Well,
am really quick.
a
Like I
lot of
saw
people
two.
describe that kind of thing, right? I mean, that and Valet really got into that, this trickster kind of vibe that sometimes these encounters have to them, right? And that it's weird. It's it's a weird thing, right? Where they are, it almost does seem like they're just messing with you,
And yeah,
That's a common people. A lot of people describe that. It's a very and sometimes those kind of those weird oddball encounters are ones that the quote serious ufologists discount them, and that's where Valet really kind of broke this ground by not just throwing out the oddball stuff, but going back to them and being like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. This is a really strange thing. But this witness seems credible. But there's some weird ones, like the one guy there was the farmer that the UFO landed and gave him pancakes, right? Like, I mean, that's buckwheat pancakes. Like,
yeah,
what was that about, right? That's a weird thing. But then Valet points out that actually buckwheat, there's a tradition in fairy folklore and stuff about eating the fairy food, made out of buckwheat and stuff like that, right? That's weird.
yeah.
So yeah, who knows what's going on? It's a strange oddball. I mean, the whole thing is weird, right? And there's strange phenomena that we're trying to translate into our three-dimensional minds, kind of three-dimensional minds, that, and I don't know. Who knows, man? The
And
universe is a weird, strange place.
I was going to ask Wham, do you think, I know Andy thinks a lot of times that Kill's overlooked. Do you think that a lot of people overlook him? I mean, it seems like he gets a lot of attention still, but I mean, do you think sometimes people kind of like shrug him off or something like it?
Well, I don't see that happening. I mean, Andy thinks that because Andy wants, I hate to say this, but Andy wants to be connected to Keel in certain ways. So, I mean, if I just look at, I mean, Andy did a great job in sort of bringing Keel back into some people's attention, at least a younger generation of people, from what I've seen. But I see Keel referenced all the time, at least in the podcasts I listen to and the things I read. So I don't necessarily think that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that is interesting to me, I mean, I've been doing, as you know, Jeffrey, I've been doing this research for 40 years or something.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting to me is that after all this time, after all these things that have been written and said and done, it's still the same old stuff. It's it's the nuts and bolts people. It's the metaphysical people. I mean, there's some more slightly more sophisticated stuff going on, but
Yeah.
But a lot of the early research, if you go back to the 70s, for example, there were a lot of, and some in the 80s, there were a lot of actually really good studies that were done of various, what you might call even micro studies that were done of flaps in particular areas or
Right.
that kind of thing. And a lot of really good data was accumulated. I mean, but those books have gone out of print. And so
Yeah.
people don't know that a lot of that stuff was done. I mean, there's a guy that we've had on the show, nice guy. I don't have any problem with him particularly, but he's in the process of making of doing a study where they're looking at the relationship between trauma and the propensity to have certain types of experiences. Well, Kenneth Ring did a study exactly like that in the 1990s. And that doesn't mean we couldn't continue to do more of it. I mean, that's not, I don't have an issue with that. But when I talked to him, he didn't even know about that study. And that's what I mean. It's like there's this kind of lack of historical sort of understanding of a lot of the stuff that has been done. And like my favorite book of all of one of my favorite books of all of this is was a study that was done, a micro study that was done, a field study that was done of UFOs in the 1970s, the mid 1970s. It's called Project Interrupted, or no, Project Identified. Project Interrupted. I'm thinking of a movie, Project Identified, and it was the guy was a geologist and a physicist, and he noticed there were he had read accounts of UFOs that were happening. This was in the Piedmont area of Missouri, of southeast Missouri, and he decided he thought it was probably a natural phenomena, or people were mistaking things. You know what I mean? So he just went out and he was going to do a full-fledged study, field study. He had teams. They were going to view things from different perspectives and triangulate. And I mean, it's all laid out in his book, very technically.
Project Identified, is that right?
Project Identified.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the book now is incredibly expensive. The hardcover. Let's see, I can't remember.
There's a PDF on archive.org.
Oh, that's right. Hold on. The author is
PDF. Get it if you can, in case they take it down.
it's called it's Harley Rutledge, PhD.
Okay.
And but what's fascinating about the book is that he's a scientist,
Right.
And he's, if you just read him just straight, and he realizes at some point that they're dealing with something that, number one, he didn't expect, and the phenomena starts behaving in ways that they can't, all they can do is observe it, really. And so that's what he ends up doing. And it follows him home, like this crap always does, and or seems to a lot. And
right.
he didn't ever ever enter the field. And he also actually gives a behind the scenes account of something that, I don't know if you remember this. I remember this because I remember it being on the news at the time.
Uh-huh.
But there was that dates me. But there was a truck driver in Missouri who claimed that he was hit by, like, he saw something in front of his truck, and so he stopped the truck and he stuck his head out, and he was hit in the face with something, and it like melted his glasses and stuff. And this became like a big, the National Enquirer went crazy about it and all this stuff. Sure. And what's interesting is that he gives a behind the scenes account of the investigation that was done into this guy's story, because he was the scientist who was retained in order to try to figure out what happened to this guy's glasses. And a lot of people don't know that, but there were some odd, there were some odd things with the glasses. And he could.
What's weird is I've never heard this story, because this stuff is right up my alley. I may have just been a little too young, maybe, at that point.
Well, yeah. I mean, this happened like back. I think it happened like in the late '60s or early '70s when this.
So it was probably just before my time, right?
Right.
I started kind of like late '70s as a kid, getting into this stuff. So it might have been
right before. Right. And so he basically what Rutledge concluded was that either this guy is lying because he could have been, and he kind of investigates that possibility, because this
Right.
guy was having some trouble at his job. He was having some issues, and so he thought that maybe the guy was faking it. I mean, he put that possibility out there, but what
Right.
he had to conclude is, given the evidence of the guy and his glasses and a few other things, that either the guy's faking or something really weird happened. So it's one of those two things. But anyway, at the end of his
Interesting.
book, he basically, he basically, the UFO activity continued for a number of years after he quit the study. And they would, whatever it was, would show up at his house. His entire family at various times saw aspects of it. But he never went into the field. He
Right.
remained an academic, and he only ever gave, to my knowledge, one paper at one MUFON symposium, in which he gives a little bit more detail about some of the follow-up stuff. But it's like, here's the book. It's like one of the best books,
Okay.
because
Yeah,
as you go
I'll check
through
it out.
it, you realize he realizes at some point that he's encountering something that he does not have a frame of reference for as a scientist. And it's fascinating.
That is cool.
It kind of unnerves him. He's sort of like,
Right.
I don't really know what to think about this.
That's fun.
And
The following you home thing is a really weird aspect. I mean, and not just that. You see it in even in a lot of paranormal encounters, right, with
Oh yeah,
hauntings and things like that.
absolutely.
Sometimes
Oh,
it'll follow you, right? So it's not. Again, there's this idea that maybe a lot of these phenomena are coming from the same, or have the same source to them, right? We're just experiencing them, or they manifest in different ways, or we experience them in different ways, with our minds, right? But there's a
right.
lot of similarities, right?
Oh no, well, I tend to think that all of these experiences sort of exist on a continuum,
Yeah.
So um, that doesn't mean that doesn't explain them. It just
No.
it's a way of it's a way of understanding
Right.
how it's a way of providing a larger context for some of them.
Right.
I think for me, what that does is it helps me to realize that this stuff is only really weird to us. I mean,
Yeah.
Jeffrey knows that I've done a lot of the stuff that I've done has been looking at, especially lately because of where I live, looking at indigenous stories of similar kinds of experiences, here in North America. And, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of stories, indigenous stories about similar kinds of experiences, events, beings, and and of course, most indigenous people, wherever they are, they have a different sort of approach to these kinds of things. I mean, they may avoid some of them because they're scary, because we don't know what the hell they are. But I mean, it's kind of like, if something can appear and disappear to you, that means that could mean that they can see you, but you can't see them, and obviously that's going to be scary. But they don't necessarily regard these things as being alien in the same way. I mean, and I don't mean by alien, I don't mean like extraterrestrial. I mean, in other words, alien to the landscape.
Yes. Right.
They're part of our lives. They're part of the world we live in.
Like we were saying earlier, right? They've always been here,
Yeah.
The idea of, aliens from outer space, I think, is more of a product of people in the 1950s and 60s, when science fiction was becoming popular, experiencing this phenomena, or these phenomena, and putting that kind of idea on it. I do like that we're starting to. You talked earlier that Valet Keel and some of their ideas, we're starting to see that come back now, which I think is refreshing.
Right.
It is funny because there's so many young people that are coming to this for the first time, like you said, that have no concept of all the historiography, right, of these subjects over the last over decades.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote my dissertation on UFO, the UFO alien abduction narrative in the United States, and that gave me kind of a big a deep perspective about just how much material is actually out there.
Oh yeah.
About just how many studies and how much data has actually been developed that has just never been gathered together into like John Keel. He wanted one of his mega goals was eventually to try to figure out a way of coming up with he didn't call it this, but this is what it would be, a database where you could feed all of these different sorts of things into it, and maybe from that database develop a sense of what if there are patterns to this, and nobody's done it yet because everybody has to have their territory staked out. So
do you hear the orcs? Do you hear the orcs? Do you hear the orc?
Is that is that an orc?
That is the pig. The orc.
The pig.
He's in the room going crazy, wanting out. And lately she's been doing it more. And I swear to God, it sounds like she says mama. I think she says mama. And when she does it, it's not like me saying mama, but it's like a it sounds like a mama. But yeah, she's been out already. She just wants food. It's her favorite pastime. Her favorite everything. But
well, food is one of my favorite things too.
Yeah, she's definitely obsessed with it. But
talking about how even just in the older literature, how everything just comes back around again. I ended up, again, I'm a collector. I ended up picking up the first 4 or 5 years of Fate magazine, every issue, just going through them. And it's, starting in the late 40s, it starts in 1948 and going through the early 50s. And it's fascinating to, go back to that time. I mean, none of this is new, right? I mean, it's
none of it. None of it. I mean, if you're familiar with the book Oahspe, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it was heavily promoted by Ray Palmer.
I know.
Right, during that,
right. I know, but I mean, if you have you ever? I actually
I tried to read it one time, and I kind of put it down. It's like reading Blavatsky. I was,
well, Blavatsky drives me nuts too. But I mean, I won't say that I read Oahspe in depth because actually there are 3 authoritative editions of it, which sounds bizarre, but there are. You can only find the first 2 at the Library of Congress. They're not widely available, but the one that's widely available was a reprint later on. But anyway, I actually forced myself to read through big chunks of it. It's got.
What did you think? I'm curious.
There are some interesting things in it.
Right.
I mean, it's one of those things where there are some interesting ideas in it. Like, for example, one of he has. I mean, I'm sure if you've looked at it, there's these bizarre. These bizarre graphics in it. Things that he drew and everything. But there's this one, but he has this really interesting idea, which, if you think about it, it's kind of an he was writing at the time when Herschel's nebula hypothesis was becoming popular in the 19th century. And so people were getting a sense of how big the cosmos was. And so you had, so, spiritualists in particular had to respond to that. So,
Right.
like Andrew Jackson, whatever his name was, Andrew Jackson Davis,
Mhm.
he developed, he created kind of a few ideas about that. Well, anyway, so what he does, what John Newbrow does in OWASP is he has this vision of the solar system, such as they understood it at the time, this vision of the solar system, and in particular Earth, as a unit that was traveling through zones in space.
Okay.
And so what this involved was him, but this is important because this is not something that most people thought about at the time.
Right.
And they didn't have photography, but he tries to draw this. So in order to do this, of course, he has to imagine being way, way far away. Like he has to sort of use his imagination to imagine what
Right.
the Earth and the solar system would be as a unit traveling through space. And when you think about it, when I thought about it, it was like, whoa, how many people were actually thinking about being
Just
off
right.
planet and doing that?
Absolutely.
And on top of that, his theories, if you his the ages that he has in his chapters, which are like totally weird, but he has this idea that part of what has caused different ages on the planet is that as it's moving through, he's not thinking of the galaxy so much, but zones in space, that as the Earth and the solar system move through zones in space, they will encounter things in space that will affect things on Earth. And that's how he's measuring time, sort of in a cosmic way. Well, that's sort of an idea that some astronomers have now, that as the Earth revolves around the galaxy, that it hits certain places in the galaxy where there's maybe more dust, or there's more this, or
Right.
there's more that, and those things may have contributed to changes on the Earth in ways we don't, or in the solar
Right.
system that we really don't know. And so
Yeah.
when I thought about that, I was like, oh, and
It's pretty cool.
he also was an early promoter of the idea of continental drift.
Oh, really?
He abso
Pre
he
Wegner.
ab he absolutely
Interesting.
I mean, that was like kind of like an idea that had been proposed, but everybody laughed about it. You know what I
Right.
mean? It wasn't accepted internationally until the 1920s.
Right.
And
Well,
and
even then it wasn't, they couldn't,
yeah,
they didn't have a mechanism for it until the 50s,
right, well, right, exactly. But I mean, it's like people laughed about it,
They did,
but
yes.
he actually argued for it,
Interesting.
and so there are these really, so of course now people who
Maybe I
believe
should
in the
give it another look. That's pretty
so
cool.
so so now people who believe in the book, of course, point at those things and say,
Right.
see, but my point is that, hey, even wackos, because I think he was kind of a wacko, even
Right.
wackos can have intuitions about how things work,
Of course.
you
Absolutely.
know?
Well, to bring it back to Ray Palmer, there's the whole shaver mystery, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Same kind of idea. This is a guy who, very clearly, and his family, he very clearly was suffering from mental illness. But, was he? Who knows? Was he picking up stuff and again translate? And then we don't know how much Palmer took his stuff and turned it into fiction, that kind of thing, right? But
Right.
um, more than one thing can be true, right? You could, who knows, right? I mean, there's that's it's an interesting thing, the whole shaver mystery. It again ties into the whole like what I was talking about earlier, that intersection between pulp fiction and science fiction and esoteric ideas and these sorts of things. Uh, you they all the shaver mystery is a great example of where all of those areas really do kind of overlap, and it's hard to tell what's what anymore, right?
Right. Well, I mean, if you even just think about somebody like Philip Dick, the science fiction writer. I
Right.
mean, he clearly was out there, like, you know, I mean, he had clear mental illness,
Right.
but he was brilliant, you know, a brilliant
Yeah.
storyteller, fascinating ideas, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Who knows? It's cool stuff.
sometimes it takes something like that, you know.
Right. There will
Well,
100% be a nice big shaver mystery chapter in my book there. That's for sure. That'll be a large part of it.
Oh, that's
You
cool.
know, and Ray Palmer himself, what a character he is. A lot of here,
Oh,
I'll
Ray
tie it
Palmer.
back into comic books for you, Jeffrey. So we've been
Yeah.
talking, your viewers, we've been talking about Ray Palmer. He was he began as a fan, early science fiction pulp fan in the late 20s and through the 30s, and ultimately became the editor of Amazing Stories in the 40s. Promoted the Shaver Mystery, all of that, and became known for that. He suffered from he had a condition that caused him, stunted his growth, basically, as they used to say in the old days, right? Probably
Was he the one
like
that had it? Didn't he have like an accident or something when he was young?
I think
And it
maybe
crippled
something like
him?
that. It was something something that stunted his growth.
It
So
was,
he
yeah,
was very short and
he
kind of
was
hunched
short and
over,
yeah,
right?
he was short and kind of crippled. Yeah, I think he had some
Yes,
kind of an
exactly.
accident, like it broke part of his back or something. I don't remember, or his
Yeah, it
legs
was
or something.
something. It was something like that. And but he was a science fiction, one of the early, like the first generation of science fiction fans, right? In the 1930s, it wrote fanzines to each other, and
Hmm.
they had the first con was the World Science Fiction Convention, Worldcon, at the World's Fair in 1939. But some of his circle of friends, that those early science fiction fans, it was all guys that went on to become professionals,
Hmm.
in publishing and comics and all of that. It was Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger were two of his friends that became editors at DC Comics. Uh, Jerry Siegel was another one, part of that fandom circle, who was one of the creators of Superman. Donald Wollheim, another one, went on to become a big science fiction publisher. And Palmer himself, right, went on to become an editor at Amazing and then founded Fate magazine. What's funny is Jeffrey, the Silver Age Atom, DC Comics, right?
yes.
Created by Julie Schwartz. What's the name of his alter ego?
I
It's
don't
Ray
know.
Palmer.
Oh, okay.
So Julie
Cool.
Schwartz named the Silver Age Atom, right? That could shrink down to size. As a joke, Julie named that character Ray Palmer after his friend Ray, right? Who was, of course, diminutive in stature or whatever, because of the accident or whatever. So just bringing it back to comics for you.
Right. Well, and to sort of like make the loophole, as you know, Ray Palmer bankrolled Kenneth Arnold to
Oh
go
yeah,
and
100%.
to go investigate the Tacoma incident.
Yes,
So
exactly.
so
Boy, that's a weird one, right?
that's a weird one. Yeah.
And one of the guys, that one of the guys that was investigated by Arnold when he went up there, and Arnold himself kind of eventually thought it was a hoax, probably.
Yeah, it was
And that those guys were messing with
was
it.
Criswell. Was Criswell.
It was Criswell, but what was the other guy's name? He ended up involved in the Kennedy assassination
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, most
crazy,
people think,
right?
a lot of people think that Criswell was an intelligence agent because
So there was some weird stuff there, right?
it's weird.
These are the fun rabbit holes, right? I can tell you've been down a few too.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I've been doing this for 40 years, and it is very interesting, knowing all this weird arcane stuff. Nobody cares except me, and a few people on these podcasts, but
you and I should compare notes more, I think.
There's a few comics that have been on Kickstarter that I want to mention real quick, and you'll understand why one in particular I really want to do, because I want to help the family of what's his name, Ernest dude? Was it Jim Varney?
Oh yeah.
His family and some comic creators have just started a Kickstarter called Ernest and the Dreamstone. And it's about a graphic novel that's Ernest back in comic form. And the family's involved with their permission. That just started on Kickstarter. And it's just cool. I want to help plug it. So hopefully, I'm helping the family in some way. So it looks cool too. It looks funny. And you can find it on Kickstarter. That's Ernest and the Dreamstone. And then some other interesting ones. I know Larry Hama, they just did a big one with the G.I. Joe, all the Marvel, and this big giant 4 phone book compendium that's on there, that's coming out, like re-releasing them because the Image owns G.I. Joe now, so they're the old Marvel ones. But also Larry Hama is doing a new comic, and I forget with who, but it's called Mounties versus Werewolves, and it's about the Canadian Mounties battling ancient werewolves in the Alberta forest. So
There you
that's
go,
on there.
werewolves again.
Yeah, Mounties versus Werewolves. Another one, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. They're doing a prequel graphic novel to those games. If you ever played those, the vampire old ones, Legacy of Kain and all that stuff that are pretty popular back in the day with Kain the vampire drinking blood from villagers and stuff. But they're putting out a graphic novel of that. And then one of the old Marvel founders is starting a whole new universe called Ecos, EKOS, and it's from Marvel Studios founding chairman David Mazel. That just started, and it's EKOS, and it's a whole new character. And I don't know, the character looks kind of like a cat man or so. I don't know what he is, but it looks interesting for sure.
Interesting.
I just usually try to get the comics if I do it. I don't really care about all the other stuff because I can't really afford it. But I'm just glad to get the comic just to read it. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with I usually get the first one, the first tier. But there's another one that's. Let me do this one, then we'll go on to something else. But this is really cool. I've already got this one a while back, but Dracula Volume 1, The Impaler by Matt Wagner and Kelly Jones. And,
I've heard this is really good.
Yeah, James Alcalon, AQ, whatever. I've talked to him. He has the company.
That's what I'm going to pick up. Some people whose opinions I very much respect say that's really great, and they're highly recommended that one.
I got it a while back, but I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. They're about to launch part 2 in it, and it's called The Dracula Volume 2, The Brides.
Cool.
It's supposed to be like the secret history of Dracula, so got to do that.
Nice.
Got to get into that. But yeah, the book, I need to read the first one. I got it. It's still in the wrapper. I'll have to rip it out. But yeah, man. So what's been going on? I know you've been involved in some projects with archaeology and African American graves and crazy stuff like that. And I know I told you the story about Little House on the Prairie down the road. They just ripped it down, a native historical site, and just kind of not even a news place anywhere has mentioned it. You can't find anything on Google about it anywhere, and which is kind of unsettling. The sign's still up, the moldy sign that tells the creepy story of the monks and the natives killing each other. And the moldy paperwork still in there. I'm sure they'll be getting rid of that next. But it's these beautiful old houses that were just like prairie kind of stuff. That's why I jokingly called Little House on the Prairie. There was like an old schoolhouse, a churner, a butter churner, and they just ripped it down. And it was a part of a park series where you go to national, like there's a thing called Heritage North where you go to different places that's on like this tour, and this was one of the stops, and it's on their site and everything. It's in Graceville on the Heritage Trail, and it's gone. There's one house left there, and that's an older house, so they'll probably get it. Probably going to build school. It's the Bible college that's doing it. And some Bible college that they even get in with the old folks here, and the old folks leave their land to them when they croak. So it's like a cult. They don't. The funny thing is, they don't know I'm across the street from them. They probably crap their pants if they knew it. They don't have a clue that I'm here at all, and they probably never will. But right across the street from this crazy like Bible college, they don't even know I broadcast. Probably
right. The Church of Mabus. What's that? Wait.
Yeah. Get a rope.
I assume that's the Nostradamus reference, right? I never asked you about that. I always just assumed, right?
Well, basically, I was on a lot of drugs, and the Mabus word, I was going to name it a metal band, and I came off the drugs and luckily didn't do a metal band because I probably would have OD'd on drugs. And the Mabus word stood out. and luckily now I just do pot. But basically, I started to have the weird encounters, after everything I went through, and it just morphed into this. Like, it started with these little bitty chat room interviews with no audio with a guy named Jeremy Vanny. We hate each other now. We don't talk, but we people would come in like Stanton Friedman. He's passed now. Jim Mars, Nick Redfern, like all these old school. It's hard to believe. Most of them have passed away now. A lot of them, and they would just like type little questions, and people would type answers back. It was really, I had to stay on the phone with Stanton Friedman because he didn't know how to do the text stuff. So the whole time I'm on the phone with Stanton Friedman as he's typing. It's just crazy. It's giving me chills. It's kind of like some history. I can't believe it myself sometimes, but there's a lot of different people. William Burns from UFO Hunters. There's so many old Lloyd Pye, who had some Star Child skull. He actually lived in Panama City. He passed away. But he was Lloyd Pye of Star Child Skull. It's on a lot of documentaries. But what's been going on with archaeology? Anything weird, or is that it seems to go on everywhere? Well, they just cover up everything, even if there's bodies, right?
Well, it's funny. One of the things, you know me, I've done a lot of work on, what a lot of my colleagues would call pseudo archaeology, alternative history and those kinds of ideas. I've tried to. There's been, I don't know how much you follow, like the debate with Flint Dibble and Graham Hancock on Rogan and that kind of stuff. There's been, and there's going to be a second episode of Graham's, show coming out, or second season rather. One of the things it's a subject that's always fascinated me, and one where I've gone, done deep dives on, and looking at a lot of, where these ideas come from, the idea of lost civilizations and things like that, or lost continents, cataclysmic geology, those kinds of things, right? It's always a subject that's fascinated me. I've actually last year went with a couple of friends and visited Egypt for the first time. Spent a couple of weeks over there, visiting a lot of the sites, and became friends with my tour guide there. He was an Egyptologist, and one of the things that I've been thinking about wanting to do is maybe start doing some tours over there and taking people over and doing, there's a lot of people that do the kind of pseudo archaeology tours and alternative history tours and stuff. What I would like to do as a professional archaeologist is go over there and visit some of those same sites, the ones that people think are, there's weird things going on here. How do we explain this? How do they do that? Right. Visit some of these same sites and, talk about those alternative ideas, but also talk about the mainstream ideas there in context. Let people see the sites for themselves, right, and kind of make up their own minds about it. I think a lot of my colleagues are pretty hostile, to this, these kinds of things, and to be frank, a lot of times they have good reason for that, right? Because they, some of the ideas that some people put out, there's just not a lot of evidence. Some people that are out there on YouTube right now are kind of riding on the coattails of people like Hancock and John Anthony West and those guys, and are really just trying to make a buck. And it's pretty obvious for those of us that have been around, right? I would love to be able to have people explore these ideas in kind of a judgment-free context in Egypt. So that's one of the things I'm wanting to put together. I'm working with a tour guide who's got his own company now. I'm hopeful, I might start doing that next year and do a tour over there and go and look at all of the kind of the unexplained sites and, talk about the different ideas, both mainstream and the more controversial ones. Awesome. So we'll see if I can get that off. That's something I'm looking to do maybe next year. So that could be kind of fun. I don't know.
Very cool. Definitely. So in Florida, were like on the news about this or something. Like I saw some weird thing, like you were on a big to-do about it. Wasn't it about some of the burial stuff, the grave stuff?
Oh, so that would be, Negro Fort at Prospect Bluff. That was a site in the Apalachicola National Forest, where I did a lot of ground penetrating radar work out there. It's a very sensitive site. We don't actually excavate there. It was a fort, a British fort that was built during the War of 1812 in what was still Spanish Florida. And the British, came down here with the idea of training both indigenous people and people that could escape from enslavement, training them as Marines to fight against the Americans in the War of 1812. And so they started building this fort. A number of people came there, joined the British, and got British citizenship. There were already a number of free Black communities in Florida already, people whose parents or grandparents, ancestors had escaped from enslavement in Georgia or the Carolinas and come into Spanish Florida. We're living alongside the Creeks and the early Seminoles, people that would come to be known as Seminoles. And they fought in the War of 1812. After the war, when the British pulled out, they took a number of people with them, but several hundred people stayed behind. We don't even, estimates kind of vary on how many people were there. And we're building this community there on the Apalachicola River in the Panhandle of Florida with a British fort that they continued to build and modify, to their own use. They had a village there, and it was probably at that time one of the largest free Black communities in North America. They had guns and cannons. They were able to protect themselves. They had farms stretching up and down the river. They lasted for a little over a year before the Americans, under orders from Andrew Jackson, invaded Spanish Florida and attacked the fort, and ultimately destroyed it with a heated cannonball hit the powder magazine and created a massive explosion, and close to 300 people died almost instantly. But many of the survivors went on to join up with the Creeks and Seminoles. That's, if you've ever heard of the Black Seminoles, that's sort of part of their origin. They went on to, the survivors went on to continue fighting the Americans for decades in the Seminole Wars afterwards, alongside the indigenous, population there in Florida. And, so that's a site I've been working on, trying to get this incredible story out there. It's an amazing story. I'm actually toying with the idea of, I work with a lot of the descendants, in helping them, tell their perspective of this story. One of the things I'd like to do, again, kind of bringing it back to comics, I would love to do a historical graphic novel telling the story. So that's something I'm exploring now, as a way to sort of get this story out there to, a younger audience that might not read history books or even watch history documentaries, right? But if we can get that story out in other media, that might be a way to do it. So that's one of the things I'm working on now.
Yeah, that's very cool. Something very similar has happened here in I live outside of Kingston in the Mid-Hudson Valley in New York.
Okay.
And just since 2019, there is a group that's called the Kingston Land Trust that has been able to they were able to successfully officially identify and save what historical records demonstrated was an African American cemetery.
Right.
But it had been abandoned. It was outside of the original walled settlement of Kingston. Kingston was, actually, the original settlement was in the 17th century. But when Kingston itself was established, that was in when the name changed, that was in 1750, and they established this place where enslaved people would be buried because they couldn't be buried in church grounds. And so basically that lot remained there. And there was an attempt in like 2013, 2017 to try to because they were going to like dig it up and build a parking lot over it.
Yeah.
And there had already been like one house that had been built in the area, and there had been some digging, and human bones had been found, and they'd been tested, and they'd been found to have been of African origin. So people knew that there were graves there, but there weren't any markers. And so eventually this land trust was able to raise enough money that they were able to bring in ground penetrating radar and prove that there were graves. And they don't know
That's great.
exactly how many graves there are,
Right.
or how
It's
far
hard to
it
tell
stretches out.
even with the ground penetrating radar. Sometimes it's difficult, you know.
Well, right, because
Um,
and because they can be stacked on top of each other and things like that. But anyway, so the ground itself has been put into a trust and it's preserved. But this has just happened very, very recently. So I was present at they did the Old Dutch Church of Kingston, which has sort of been they've been sort of at the center of several programs of reconciliation, not only with the African American community, many of whom are in Kingston are descendants from people who probably were enslaved because of the names that they have. But also with the indigenous population here. A lot of people think, of course, that everybody left, all the indigenous people left. Most of them did, but there actually have always been a root population of indigenous people that stayed. And many of them adopted Dutch or English sounding names, but if you actually trace the names, they're not real.
Right.
They
Interesting.
and that was so that they could pass, that they could
Right.
hide in plain sight.
Yep.
But anyway, so I was present.
It's interesting to hear these stories that far north, because this is commonplace. All of these kinds of stories in the South.
Oh,
right?
yeah, right. Yeah. Well, it's very common in the Northeast.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
and you don't have, if you think about it, you don't really have reservations as such in
Right.
in the East in quite the same way. I mean, there are some now that they've established, but like in New York, the places where like the Haudenosaunee are, we call them the Iroquois, where they are,
hmm
they don't, their land is not on reservations. There's a different status that applies to that territory, and it's held in a different relationship to the state of New York. So it's just interesting. But anyway, I was at a ceremony of reconciliation where the Old Dutch Church, which is the original Dutch church, or descended from the original Dutch church, that was was established in Kingston. I think it was established, back early 18th century. Stuff here is so old.
Right.
And it was really an amazing ceremony, to sort of to say we're sorry.
Yeah. I've been fortunate to be a part of a few similar ceremonies, and it's a powerful thing, and it's an honor to be when you're allowed to be a part of those kinds of things.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It's very much an honor. But so I'm glad that you're involved with these things too, because
I do.
this kind of history is really important.
The so-called abandoned African American cemeteries. We use the term abandoned. Many times, erased is a more accurate adjective.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's certainly in the South. It's a prevalent problem. It's great to hear a success story like that.
Right. Well,
we've had a
and
few down here, but not always.
Well, to me, what's important about that is, people talk about here in the Northeast, people talk about, slavery like it's just a Southern thing, like it just happened in the South. Well, it was legal in New York until the 1820s. So it's like, no, it happened here too. And in fact, the street that I live on, if you just go down the street, at the end of the street, there are 3 graves down at the end of the street that they found, that they have sequestered. 2 of them still have stones. There's no writing. It's all worn off, but of formerly enslaved people that are down there.
Right.
So it's kind of like people are becoming a little bit more aware.
They are, and it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
I'm
Definitely.
It's one of the things I'm trying to get the word out down here in Florida. It's become a major issue and been in the news quite a bit down here in Florida with a number of cemeteries that have been found in various places. So it is becoming, people are now more cognizant of it.
Well, I think a graphic novel would be cool. I think that would be
I'll give
cool.
it a shot. We'll see. It's in the planning stages. Working on a script.
Well,
Cool.
I would give Jeff the title of the coolest dude I've ever met in Florida.
I doubt that. You've had some pretty cool people on this show. Come on, man.
I'd have to. I'm having a memory blank of anyone else in Florida. There might be someone, but right now you're
okay, maybe in Florida.
he means in Florida.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah,
in Northwest Florida, maybe where you and I are. Maybe. There's that one Bigfoot dude though.
Yeah, there's a bunch, but right now my mind is. But you got, Conan the Barbarian, graves, historical sites, Egypt. You're like Indiana Jones. Come on, man. So it's a good
I'm
thing.
trying. That's the idea. Yeah. We'll see.
But it's always a pleasure, man. We got like 2 minutes. Is there anything you want to plug or a link or anything like that?
You got a website?
Check out the obviously check out the new Conan comics if you're into that sort of thing from Titan Comics and Heroic Signatures. At your support your local comic store. Go put them on your pull list. If you guys are interested in some of the things that I do, my YouTube channel is called An Age Undreamed Of. So check that out and subscribe. I'm going to start. It's been a little inactive for the last few years. I'm about to start kicking it up again and getting it going again.
Very cool.
There it is.
An Age Undreamed Of.
An Age Undreamed
Of.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's a lot of Robert E. Howard and Conan stuff on there. I'm about to start mixing in some alternative history stuff, and I'm going to start doing some of the rabbit holes we even talked about tonight. Going, some of the origins of some of the kind of crazy ideas about archaeology and history and how they cross over with pulp fiction and early science fiction and fantasy. I'm going to start getting some more videos up there talking.
Oh, I just pulled one up. Creating an Age Undreamed Of. It says
there you go.
You were at the 41st annual PCA ACA National Conference. I used to go to that darn conference.
Oh, you used to go to PCA? Nice.
Years and years and years. See, my PhD's in American Studies. So
very cool.
I used to go to that.
I was the area chair for pulp studies for a while.
In
the 2000 teens, during that period. So that one's all about Robert E. Howard and Conan and how he used Atlantis and Lemuria in his fiction and some of his sources, like William Scott Elliott. So might be right up here. You might enjoy that.
Hey man,
probably would.
What's that movie again with Renee Zellweger and Vincent D'Onofrio about Robert Howard? What's it called? Do you remember offhand? I always forget.
The Whole Wide World.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
I've heard of that actually.
It's worth watching. Yeah. It's kind of depressing, but it's good. It's Renee Zellweger and D'Onofrio.
Early, one of her first movies. D'Onofrio plays Robert E. Howard. Does a great job. It's a cool movie. Yeah.
Kind of a weird old classic, kind of hard to find thing.
Mid-90s.
So,
it's on. It looks like. Let's see here. Is it on Prime Video or is it on DVD?
I had this Romanian dude that does these Vlad the Impaler games on Steam. His name's Tiberius. He told me about a 1979 Vlad Tepes. It's called Vlad Tepes. It's on YouTube, and it's like a released by the Romanian government, the story of Vlad the Impaler. It's in Romanian subtitles. If you get bored, that's on YouTube. I need to watch it still, but it looked pretty. I flipped through it. It was pretty trippy for sure. But man, we appreciate it. Go ahead.
You can watch this movie on Amazon Prime.
It's on there,
I'm looking at it right now.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, we appreciate it so much. It's Jeff Shanks.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure.
Always, I had a blast. Thank you so much.
All right.
You listen to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans, America's Stonehenge. Dennis Stone next week. The publicist Mark Eddy, who's a friend of mine, is going to sit in. He sat in with Gary Clevenger on Buddy Holly and Ramon's last week, was it, or whenever? But he's just going to sit in. He sits in once in a blue moon, but mostly he asks really deep questions that I probably wouldn't. Wham might could ask him, but crazy, weird, like archaeological stuff that my brain can't even wrap around. But sometimes he sit in on Gary Clevenger. But he's going to sit in next week with me and Wham. But he's a good dude. He's co-hosted with me a million years ago. And it's the publicist that gets us a lot of these wild interviews lately. But all right, everybody, have a good weekend. I might watch that movie too on there. That's a good one. But all right, take care, Wham. Take care. All right, bye, everybody. Good night.
All right.